My name is Peter Daltrey, and Christopher has asked me to talk to you about my band Kaleidoscope for your Needle Club, which sounds great. Sounds like a good group. Our band started in 1964 in Acton in West London. We came together as a band called the Sidekicks initially. We were briefly called The Key. When we secured our recording contract with Fontana in January of 1967, we changed our name to Kaleidoscope, which was a very 60s sort of word. It was a buzzword at the time. We began writing and recording for Fontana in the spring, very early spring of 67. Eddie and I had been writing songs ever since the band began. We realised that we couldn't go out on the road doing covers and playing other people's songs all the time, so we began writing our own. And this is what attracted the record company to the band, because of the strength of the songs, I think. The original idea was to release Holiday Maker as the A-side of the single, followed by an album. But when Eddie and I wrote Flight from a Sheer, everything changed. Our producer, Dick Leahy at Fontana, decided that Flight from a Sheer would be a much better A-side. It was 1967 and everyone was writing different music at this time. It gets labelled as psychedelia, but to be honest, we were just writing songs as best as we could. We must have been influenced by other bands around at the time. In fact, Pink Floyd, I think, were recording The Dark Side of the Moon somewhere else in London at the same time. So we were recording a lot of tracks ready for a first album, but we needed this single to be released first to lead into the album and hopefully, create more sales. So Flight from a Sheer was recorded, but it meant that the time it took to do that pushed back the release date for the album, which was now called Tangerine Dream, which should have been released right in the middle of the summer, the so-called Summer of Love in 1967, Flower Power and all that. But it got pushed back to November, which was a shame because it should have been released in the summer. In fact, with hindsight, it probably would have been better to have the A-side as Holiday Maker and release that in the summer to coincide with the British holiday time. Everybody goes to the seaside in the summer, and that's what the song was about. So that might have been a better idea, but that's all water under the bridge. It's a shame because Flight from a Sheer was a good song, but it was perhaps a tad too unusual for the time. So we then recorded a second album, Faintly Blowing, with some more singles, but unfortunately the success wasn't there. I'm not sure why. We had a lot of problems with the record company. Their distribution was pretty poor, and people would write to us saying, "We love your band, but we simply can't buy the records. They're never in the shops," which was a great shame. So our career sort of bubbled along. We were doing okay, but we weren't particularly successful with record sales. We became disillusioned with the label and decided to change our label and signed with Vertigo. We also decided, which was quite unusual, to change the band's name. This was because the Kaleidoscope and Faintly Blowing Tangerine Dream period really was over. Psychedelia didn't last long. It was only a fad for about 18 months, and we were very fortunate to be recording during that 18 months. But it began to change, and we began to incorporate other instruments within our lineup and record differently. So we changed our name to Fairfield Parlour and released our first album, From Home to Home, with a single, Bordeaux Rosé. And again, it did about the same as the Kaleidoscope records. It had very good reviews, but unfortunately the sales weren't there because the single that we'd released to boost the album, Bordeaux Rosé, although it had a lot of radio play, was not successful again, which was a great shame and a bit of a mystery, to be honest. I mean, there's always been this mystery around our band that we should have been much bigger, but we weren't. But, you know, that's, as I say, water under the bridge. So we recorded from home to home. And then we set about recording, writing and recording our major work, which was White-Faced Lady. This was a so-called concept album, which, you know, not everybody likes, but, you know, we thought it was a good idea. It had a story behind it. All the songs were linked, and it was going to be a double album. The record company executive that we were dealing with at the time, Olaf Weiper, was right behind us. He said, yeah, go away and do it, go and record it, and when you finish, come back and we'll release it. It's going to be great. Well, we did that. We actually played at the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, which was which, if you know anything about my band, and I'm sure you can find it all online, have a look at that, because that's another whole story, the Isle of Wight saga. But when we went back to the executive at the label to say, we finished the album, the double album, it's all ready to go, he wasn't there. He'd left the label. And unfortunately, the other executives now at the label refused to honour any of his promises or any of his projects that he had. And so at that point, we didn't have a label, couldn't release the album, and the band broke up. But unbeknown to us, over the years, gradually our reputation, although it went from rock bottom, it began to grow. People like yourselves, younger people, were discovering our music, and they liked the psychedelic albums, the psychedelic elements in the music, which is, you know, of great interest to people today, which is wonderful, because it meant that suddenly gradually rather, our reputation began to grow. I'd never stopped recording. I was always writing and recording. And in fact, have recently released my new album, The Leopard and the Lamb, which I think is probably, I don't know, might be my 26th album. But over the years, you know, we've released a lot of records, written a lot of songs. I mean, there was Tangerine Dream, Faintly Blowing, From Home to Home, White-Faced Lady. Then there's all my own albums. You know, previous to this current album, I'd released an album with Mark Mortimer's The No Escape called Running Through Chelsea, which I love. I love collaborating with people, so it was great to be able to record with Mark. And now, as I say, my own album, The Leopard and the Lamb, is out. So I hope that, yes, you're interested in Kaleidoscope, and I understand that, and I really appreciate your support, and I thank you for that. But it would be good if you could also investigate some of our other music, particularly the Fairfield Parlour album, From Home to Home. The album, the double album, White-Faced Lady, went out under the name of Kaleidoscope much later. It wasn't released, I don't think, till about 1990. And then, as I say, if you can follow on into my own solo recordings, you might find that there are albums there and songs there that are familiar to you from the Kaleidoscope back catalogue. But it's just great that people like yourselves are now interested in our music, and I really appreciate that, and I know Danny does. Unfortunately, and with great sadness, Eddie Puma and Steve Clark have now passed on, but Danny and I are still here, and we're hoping that in possibly later this year, I mean, this project has been cooking away for over 10 years, but we're hoping that eventually we will put out a box set with all the Kaleidoscope material on it, every single thing we ever recorded. The plan is that that will be released later this year, but it's been on hold for a while because it's been difficult to deal with the original record company, Universal, who own the Kaleidoscope recordings. But keep your fingers crossed. If you're interested in Kaleidoscope, then you might be able to save up a bit of money, because it'll probably be expensive, and buy a box set with everything on it that we've ever recorded. But it's great to hear from Christopher that there are clubs like yours that are listening to this older music, particularly ours, and appreciating it. if there's anything else you want to know about the band, I'm sure you can find it online, or I'm sure if you ask Christopher, he'll get in touch with me and I can give you some details like how the songs were written. I mean, for instance, on Tangerine Dream, just to give you a little bit of background, In the Room of Percussion is about the room in Acton in Eddie's house where he and I used to write our songs. That is the Room of Percussion. Dear Nellie Goodrich was about when I was living at home with my parents, and I'd get up late in the morning and look out the window of the house, and a little girl would be walking by on her way to work. It just struck an idea in my mind, and she was a pretty little girl, and I thought, well, it would be nice to write her a letter to tell her how much I like her. And that's the story behind Dear Nellie Goodrich. The Sky Children, I mean, I know a lot of people love the Sky Children. The lyric to the Sky Children was written on a beach in Dorset in England in the summer of 1966. The band were on holiday together down there, and each morning we used to climb up to a castle, climb back down to the beach and walk all the way along the beach back to Swanage. And it was a beautiful morning. The seagulls were singing, swooping down. The sun was shining, sparkling off the waves. And this song began to come to me. I don't know why. A million white flowers in the sky. And this whole fairy tale came to me. And I started thinking of it and putting it together in my head. But of course, I didn't have a pen or paper. So I started to just try and remember all the words. And then there were a lot of words, and I was adding more and more verses as well. So by the time we got back to the campsite, I had to try and get all of this back out of my head with a pen and paper and write it down. But that is the origin of the Sky Children. That's where that came from. But I'm sure if there's anything else you want to know, Christopher will ask me particular details about particular songs. But really all I want to say is thank you very much for listening to the music. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you go on enjoying it. And I hope you spread the word about Kaleidoscope, about Fairfield Parlour and my own solo stuff. But really, thank you very much indeed. And goodbye from England. Cheerio, the Needle Club. Thank you, Christopher. Cheerio.